Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Curtains Up. Today, I'm truly honored to welcome a legendary figure in the world of theater, Professor Kathy Perkins. Professor Perkins is a celebrated lighting designer, a theater historian, and a professor whose groundbreaking work has illuminated stages and spotlighted stories for over 4 decades. Her passion for bringing underrepresented voices to the forefront, particularly black women playwrights, has transformed both the academic and professional theater worlds. She's not only designed lighting for productions across the United States, Africa, and the Caribbean, but she's also edited some of the most influential anthologies of African American women's plays and critical writings. In this episode, we'll dive into her incredible journey, the power of storytelling through light, and her lifelong mission to make theater a more inclusive and empowering space. Professor Perkins, welcome to the show. It is an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you, Rohan. First of all, I want to say how impressed I am with this podcast project you're doing for someone who's in high school. I love the idea of very young historians, and I hope you keep it up, even if you don't do it full time. But I think what you're doing is so important.
So yeah, thank you so much. I want to get this as far as I can before it hits a stop. So thank you so much for agreeing to be on this, and let's get started.
Yes.
To start us off, I'd love to hear about what first drew you into lighting design. How did you get started on this path?
Well, it was acting at first. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and as a child, I would perform in my church and my schools all the way up through high school. And it was in high school that I did a lot of acting, and I realized this is what I really want to do. So I went to Howard University, which is a historically black college in Washington, D.C., in a fabulous theater department, thinking I was going to go there and become a Broadway actress upon graduation. And at Howard, during your freshman year, you have to take a course called practicum, where you have to do work in the scene shop, costume shop. You have to hang lights and focus. You have to do props. You have to do everything. They want you to know all aspects of theater. So for one show, which was called Wine in the Wilderness, I was on props and lighting crew. And my supervisor was a sophomore who was a lighting major who eventually became my best friend. So we're sitting backstage waiting for the curtain to go up, and he, just out of the blue, he asked me, he says, "What are you going to do with a degree in a BFA in acting?" And this is 1973, mind you. And I said, "I'm going to Broadway. What do you think?" He said, "I've seen you hanging focused lights, and I think you'd be good in this area. And we have a touring house next door, literally next door to the theater department. And you can come over there and make a lot of money. And we really need black people behind the scenes. And I've also seen you act, and you're okay. You know, it's all right." And so after I got over my bruised ego, I came back to him the next day and said, "Yeah, I'll take you up on your offer." And so that's how I got started in lighting. I didn't know that lighting was a profession or anything. You know, I noticed lights, but I didn't notice them. But that's how I got started. I did it originally for the money, and then it became a passion. So I started working in my department. I switched my major. And the rest is history.
That sounds like a really funny backstory. You just got in lighting design because somebody said, "You're not that good at acting."
I said, "I'm not that good at," that was the best advice. And he said it out of love. Only a good friend would tell you that.
No, yeah, I just find that so like funny how because best friends, right? They'll always tell you what's on their mind. They're never gonna sugarcoat it. So it's just I'm just like picturing like, hey, do lighting.
Yes, you can't act, Yeah.
Yeah. And then my next question was there a moment or production early on that made you realize that this was your artistic path? Like, and how did that experience shape your commitment to telling stories through that light?
I did lights for production. It was called Ladies in Waiting in my department. I think it may have been my first main stage production. And I was just blown away. I guess in my early years, it realized me the power of lighting, how we could help shape the story, how I determine what you see, how you see it, when you see it and everything. And with this show, there was a lot of creative things I could do because the play took place in a women's prison. And so there were moments I could use, I could isolate spaces, I could make it very dim. So that sort of solidified, yeah, this is really what I want to do. I really want to do this. And this was like my junior, maybe my senior year, I'm not sure.
Of high school or of
No,
college?
no, this is college at Howard.
Okay, okay.
I only started doing lighting in college.
Lighting in college, yeah. Yeah, okay. You spent much of your career amplifying the voices of Black women in theater, both on stage and behind the scenes. In fact, I saw before this episode, I saw an interview of you talking about your lighting experience, and I was curious, what first inspired you to focus on that mission, and what challenges did you face as a woman in a field that hasn't always made space for these stories?
Well, it's interesting too because first my research was on African Americans behind the scene, more tech people than women. But I was at a conference. This must have been about, I don't know, 84 or something like that. It was a Black theater conference, and there was a panel on Black women playwrights, and it was a very prominent Black woman scholar. She made this comment about, oh, there were no significant playwrights before Lorraine Hansberry, which was 1959 with The Raisin in the Sun. And I was just in shock because there was a book out called Black Theater USA, which had and was an anthology of plays of Black Americans from like the 18 whatever up to the present. And the guy has a whole section on early Black women. And at the time, that was like the Bible of Black theater. And it's like, how could she not have seen this? This doesn't make any sense. And ironically, I went to another panel on early Black writers, and someone else sort of made the same comment. Oh, before Lorraine Hansberry, there was really no Black women who had anything of significance to write. And I just remember being so angry behind both those panels, and that's when I decided, I need to do something. I need to do something. At that point, I was sort of considering myself a scholar. And I said, I can do this. I'm just going to look for, I talked to two of my advisors, two of my mentors. One had written a book called 7 Plays by Black Women. They were plays by Black women after the 1950s. So I told her, what I wanted to do. And she said, well, since my book starts after the 50s, why don't you do before the 50s? And your book could be sort of like a companion piece to mine. And I thought that was a great idea. So, it took me a couple of years to work on it. And so all of the women in the collection, this was my first book. They were all dead except for one woman who was 88 at the time. And I thought she was dead when someone said, just go call her and go talk to her. So, whoa. And her name was Mae Miller. And she was so instrumental in me getting the book completed. And, she helped me. She knew everybody who was in the book because she was part of that Harlem Renaissance in the 20s and stuff. So she knew everybody. So she was very instrumental in helping me do that. And then I just sort of took off. But after that one, a friend called me and said, oh, you did these plays about, some of them about lynching, and I want to do a collection of plays on lynching plays in America. And she said, would you co-author with me? And I said, sure, that's fine. And I did that. And then another friend of mine who's Japanese American, we were both teaching a course on, multicultural theater. And we were always calling each other and saying, do you have a play by a Native American? You have another play by an Asian American? And so we decided, let's just put together a collection of plays by women of color. And it had never been done, and it did extremely well. We had African American, Native American, Asian American, and Latinas. And it was called, Plays by Women of Color. And then I started doing other plays, and I got interested in African women. So, yeah. And so it just sort of took off.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting journey. You, where was so how did you get to the panels again? I'm sorry, like.
No, it was a festival called Black Theater Network we were in Winston-Salem that particular summer.
So, yeah. So okay. That's kind of sad though how they just went up and said.
I wanted to go up to each of the women and say, don't you know this book? And I said no. I was a little too intimidated because they were like really big names, and it's like no.
Well, hey, now you're a big name, so.
So I said, let it go. If that's what they believe, that's fine. Yeah.
Hey, just like in general, the amount of work you've done for both communities, just in general, like colored actors and like people who you wouldn't think write plays, and just in general the way you've shown a spotlight on them, kind of like how I'm doing right now. It's just like it's really just changed how the entire industry has worked. So just like in general, that's such like an amazing thing to have even like considered doing, because you flipped the script, you changed the entirety of how it's run, and just like wow, you know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. And then how do you approach designing light for a production? What is your process from reading the script to rehearsals to the final cues?
I know everybody asks me that, and because I've worked with so many different cultures, so many places around the world, the process is very different. Just to give you an example, I did a show in Brazil. It was a children's show I did in Brazil. It was a non-verbal play, okay? So, I just had a script that had stage directions, more or less, because I can't read Portuguese. So a lot of the design process happened once we literally got into the space. I mean, there was a rehearsal, sort of a run through, and in a lot of places, it's a real collaborative process. So it's not just my lighting and his set design or costume. We all work very closely together. And that's what I loved about it, because, we're sitting there, I'm sitting in rehearsal, it's like, okay, I want to do this. And the the projection designer will say, oh, well, what if we try this together? So it's a real collaborative process. Here in the US, it's different. In fact, I was in a production meeting earlier today, and it was like, this is what the set design is going to do. This is what the costume design is going to do. And then at some point, we all come together. Of course, I have a say so in the sets and the costumes if it's not working with lighting. But yeah, usually I start with the script, and with this particular show, I haven't had a chance to have a discussion with the director. So that's the first thing I do. I read the script, and then I talk to the directors, like, what direction do you want to take this play in? The play says 1960s, but sometimes the director will say, I want to put it back in Greek period. I've had that done to me, thinking this was the period that they were going to do it in. They will change, the time period, or they will say, I want to make this play very futuristic. I want to change a whole lot of things. So I need to get a sense from the director which direction we're taking this play in before I even start thinking anything.
Considering it, okay.
And then a lot of it, I can't, the set designer really sets the tone for the play. So I can't really start thinking about the design until I know, what does the scenery look like? This play is a fairly realistic play, but she could have made it with a very minimal set or whatever. So all of those things. And then as the lighting designer, because I am responsible for everything visual on stage. So I need to know what the costumes look like, what the actors look like, I need to know about sound, because I have to bring it all together. And I spend a lot of time on costume design, on the costume designers. So I like to see the sketches early on, and I like to see the actors early on. Do I have a cast that's a range of colors? Does anybody in the cast have red hair or a bald head or whatever? So those are things that I have to concern myself with. And then a lot of it has to do with how much time do I have in the space? Do I have 10 days between focus and opening night, or do I have 5 days? That all of that makes determines what I do. And then how much equipment do I have? Do I have all traditional conventional lights, or do I have a lighting plot rig with where I've got like 25 moving lights? That makes a big difference too, which means I can do a lot more in a short period of time. So it's many variables that will determine my process.
I see. Yeah. And then like I remember I recently recorded another episode with another lighting designer, and what they said was that what they do is that once they read the script, they go into the rehearsal process with this like with a vision, and then collaborate with other designers like set designers, costume designers, and the director in order to make sure that they have one shared vision.
Right.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so I really liked that whole idea of like each one coming in with their own vision and then coming together to create this one massive vision that is what everyone sees. But I also like the way that you're describing it because there is a lot of variables. But like you're gonna need to see, you're gonna have to make sure that the light doesn't clash with the costumes. You're gonna have to make
Right,
sure
right,
that
right,
the follow spots follow correctly and don't get
right,
blocked by a tree that's on the set. So
right,
it's just really interesting to see both these like different perspectives, and they both work. You know what I mean?
right.
So
But
yeah, it's just like
it should
yeah,
really
sorry.
be about the director's vision, not mine, not the costume person. I mean, they will tell us out their vision, but I may say, I may add something to it, or I may say, oh, well, can we try this? But I didn't go into the rehearsal with my vision. I mean, we would have had meetings way before now, before the rehearsal. Because, like I said, with this show, I'm meeting with the director next week to find out, what's your vision for this play? Are we going
Yeah.
realism or what? What do you see the mood of the play? We go from the 60s to 2010, and the quality of light changes through over decades. So that's what we're going to have that discussion. So
Okay.
for me, all of that's discussed way before I get into the rehearsal room.
Yeah, no, that's a nice way to well, not nice way, but that's thank you for describing the process of that and just like how it looks.
Uh-huh.
And then you've designed over 300 productions, each one being amazing and like almost nationally recognized.
Probably.
Are there are there
I mean,
any
if I
particular
include concerts and dance and whatever.
yeah are there any particular shows that stand out as turning points or like personal favorites?
Yeah, yeah. I just did this yesterday. I was talking to a group a day before. I have a play called East Texas Hot Link. It's not a very well known play. I first did it in 1998 in Chicago. And what I loved about the play was, well, first of all, I'm a very subtle lighting designer. I'm not a big splashy lighting designer. This particular play, it took place in the 1970s in Tennessee, up on a hill in a juke joint, and it's a murder mystery. And so there are about 6 people in the whole play, and they come in and out of this juke joint, a bar, whatever you call it. And the play starts at dusk, so there's a little light outside. Well, the sun is setting outside. And by the time we're at the end of the play, it's dark. It's quite dark outside. And what happens, like I said, because it's a, a murder mystery, there's this feeling of interrogation throughout the play. So there's this one overhead light that is supposed to illuminate the whole space. And, the play gets darker and darker, and the focus is this bright light. And as people walk underneath it, it's almost like they're being interrogated. And what I loved about this show, it played without an intermission. It was about maybe a little under 2 hours. And all my light cues were anywhere from 8 minutes to 20 minutes. Nobody noticed a light change. My friends would come out of the theater and said, "Oh my God, this show is amazing. But I'm sorry, I didn't notice your lights." And that's a good sign because, in many instances, if you don't notice the lights, that means I did
You're
my
doing a
job.
good job, yeah.
Yeah, because the show went from bright to almost dark, except for this one light. And, people were aware that they knew something was happening, but they couldn't quite figure out what
Yeah,
it.
because they're all focused on the story.
Right, they're focused on the story, and that's part of my job. I'm not an ostentatious lighting designer, which I think is part of the problem nowadays with all this technology with moving lights and LEDs. I'm there to support the story, the playwright, not to take away from it. So I'm always very conscious of that when I'm doing a show. Okay, if I
Yeah,
put
I think that viewpoint is not frequent enough anymore. Like with current theater,
no,
lighting has slowly grown to be like more and more and more like um big, if that makes sense. Like you
yeah,
can clearly see it, and the way you're describing it, it sounds like you're trying to make it so that like it flowed with the story. And I'm not saying that current lighting designers don't do that. Like they should do flow with the story, but it's the big versus small that's getting me, and I
right.
think that's
And
really interesting.
musical, yeah, musicals all about flash and stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, I've just seen basic plays where it's like too many light cues. It's we don't need all this, whatever. I was laughing because there's I don't know her that well, but she's a lighting designer. She was nominated for 2 Tonys for her shows, and she was just shocked because she said, you know, the lighting designers that win Tonys for Broadway shows, it's like the ones that have the most cues and the most lights hung and the flashes. And she says my lighting is very subtle, and I like to work in the darkness compared to what they do, and so I was like, oh, okay, someone else agrees with me.
Yeah.
It just
So
gets
then,
too much.
and then, yeah, this entire conversation, um, I would like to add one last point. What advice would you give to young theater artists, especially people of color, who want to pursue a career in lighting or theater design?
Well, first of all, you have to figure out what it is you want to do in lighting. Because when I came along, there were not that many opportunities. You did theater, you did opera, or you did dance. Nowadays you can do theater, dance, you can do cruise ships. I mean, that's a booming business. You can do architecture lighting. There's uh, this concert lighting. There's oh God, theme parks. I mean, there's anything you can imagine. Um, lighting homes. If you study the basics of lighting, you can take it anywhere. I had a student who ended up working for Ringling Brothers, the circus, which no longer exists. Um, but if your passion is plays, theater, um, and there's a lighting designer that you really appreciate, I would contact that person. All they can say is no. You know, um, to get a good start. The other thing is you have to have a good mentor. I was blessed. I had amazing mentors throughout undergrad and grad school, and even when I worked professionally. So that's the main thing. You need a mentor, somebody who can help you make connections. Because it's a business. It's all about who you know, and yes, you need to be creative, but a lot of it is about who you know. And a lot of the jobs that I've gotten throughout my life are from connections. This person knew this person and they referred me, whatever. Uh, and you can't be afraid of the word no. I mean, in this business, you're going to hear that a lot.
You gotta ask a bunch of people. Yeah,
Right.
I
And you
think
just can't let that, deter you.
Yeah,
And
I think one of the craziest things that's happened throughout this I guess series of episodes about the unsung heroes of theaters is that almost every guest speaker I've talked to, including you, professors, and just in general professional designers, they have all like almost all of them, they've all said that asking for help is the one thing you can do. Like that question I have is, what piece of advice would you give? And everybody has said ask for help. And I think that's something that the audience should really take a note of. It's
oh,
just that, like, you know, there's endless possibilities and you can do anything. You just have to get started. And to get
right,
started, you have to ask. And I think that's just one of the biggest things.
right, right. So, like, again, you've got to have a mentor, someone who knows the business, you know,
Yeah.
do it by yourself.
And that brings me to the end of my questions. Thank you so much for illuminating not just the stage, but our understanding of what it means to tell stories through light, history, and purpose.
Okay, and thank you so much for this podcast. It's amazing.
Of course. And your work, just like, it's amazing. It continues to inspire students, artists, and audiences across generations. Thank you so much for both joining us and for everything you do.
Thank you.